Good afternoon, Mr. Reed. How are you?
I'm good, Mr. Dodd. Thank you.
So first of all, I'd like you to pull up New Energy Economy Exhibit 6, if you could.
Yes, I have that.
And this is the gas company's responses to New Energy Economy's third set of interrogatories and requests for production, correct?
Correct.
And you reviewed the responses to these interrogatories and requests for production?
Yes, I reviewed all of them, some of which I prepared.
And these ones, you swore to the veracity of these responses, correct?
Correct.
And to the best of your knowledge and belief, the responses and materials contained within New Energy Economy Exhibit 6 are true and correct.
Yes.
Thank you. And now I'd like you to turn to New Energy Economy Exhibit 8.
I have that.
These are the gas company's responses to New Energy Economy's fifth set of interrogatories and requests for production, correct?
Yes.
And you reviewed the responses to these interrogatories and requests for production, right?
I did.
And in fact, you swore to the veracity of the responses that you helped prepared, which were to interrogatories 5-1, 5-2, and 5-5, correct?
Yes, I had partial responsibility for some of those, but yes, I reviewed all of them.
And to the best of your knowledge and belief, the responses and materials contained within New Energy Economy Exhibit 8 are true and correct, right?
That's correct.
All right. Thank you very much. You can go ahead and set those aside. All right. So first, I want to talk a little bit about your background and experience, okay?
Certainly.
You have 45 years of experience as a financial and economic consultant in the energy industry.
Yeah, a little more now, but yes.
And you have provided advisory services in the areas of purchases, project finance, energy market analysis, and energy contract negotiations, right?
That's true.
You were the chief economist at the Southern California Gas Company.
When I left there, yes.
And in fact, you have personally managed or participated in the negotiation, drafting, and regulatory support of hundreds of energy contracts, pipeline and storage contracts, and facility leases, right?
True.
And your work on those contracts has resulted in hundreds of millions of dollars of savings through contract renegotiation.
Yes, that's also correct.
All right, now I want to talk about the New Mexico Gas Company's contracts, okay?
Okay.
You have not reviewed New Mexico Gas Company's gas procurement contracts, correct?
Generally, that's correct. I've reviewed the standard form of contract they used, but I did not go and review each individual gas contract.
And you did not analyze those contracts to determine whether they are favorable to ratepayers or if they could be improved?
That's correct. That wasn't part of my assignment. As I understand it, the company goes through the defense of those contracts and the costs in their gas cost adjustment filings and in other proceedings. So that was not part of my assignment here.
And you did not analyze those contracts to determine whether they offer protections against default, correct?
Not the individual contracts, only the standard contract.
You also did not conduct an examination of the gas company's contracts to determine if negotiations or renegotiations should be undertaken to protect consumers from defaulting suppliers, right?
Correct. That wasn't part of my review.
And you did not conduct an analysis of the gas company's gas procurement contracts to determine if they embrace best practices or could use improvement, right?
Again, correct, not part of my review.
And you did not conduct an analysis to determine how much price protection from an event like Winter Storm Uri could have been achieved if the gas company were to reconsider its gas supply, transportation, storage portfolio, hedging, and purchasing practices, or any combination thereof, did you?
Can I have that full question again? I'm sorry.
Okay. You did not conduct an analysis to determine how much price protection from an event like Winter Storm Uri could be achieved if the gas company were to reconsider its gas supply, transportation, storage portfolio, hedging, and purchasing practices, or any combination thereof, did you?
Only partially. So as you know, I did examine how much price protection could be achieved from transitioning from Keystone to the LNG facility, or how much could have been achieved in Winter Storm Uri if that had been in place at the time. And then we also did that same analysis, excluding Winter Storm Uri, for the past 5 years. So with regard to the LNG facility, the answer is yes, I did do that. With regard to the entirety of the portfolio, the answer is no, I did not.
Okay, thank you. And we'll talk about the LNG facility, all right?
Good.
And you also did not conduct any analysis of the gas company's hedging practices to determine if they could be improved, correct?
In general, that's correct. I reviewed the testimony that Mr. Bullard submitted in prior proceedings with regard to the company's hedging programs and the limitations on cost-effective solutions, but I did not conduct my own analysis or review of hedging for them.
All right. And so you did not perform your own analysis, correct?
Correct. I reviewed the one that they had prepared.
Okay. So now I'd like to turn and talk about JJR3. Okay. And this is contained within your direct testimony, correct?
Yes, it is.
All right. Can you see that there?
I can.
All right. And I know it's a little small, but I'm going to zoom in as we need things, okay? So on cross with the Attorney General, you stated that the JJR3 savings of 13.8 million is a relatively easy number that you could achieve with LNG, correct?
Yes, actually, what I was doing was reciting what Mr. Bullard had said this morning in that regard, but I agree with that statement.
Okay, and what you're referring to there is what's contained on line 24 of this exhibit. And let me try and zoom in here. It's this, is that this figure here at the end of line 24?
Yes, in the total column, if we were to see the top of that page.
Yes, total here. And then this figure here, correct?
Correct.
And can you see my cursor on this as I move it across the screen?
I can, yes.
Excellent. All right. So all of these figures in JJR3, because I think this came up yesterday during Mr. Bullard's testimony, all of the figures contained here that talk about gas volume, those are all in MCF, correct?
Not quite. If you go to the top left corner of the spreadsheet, you'll see it's labeled above line 1 as being in decatherms.
Yeah.
Okay.
So unless they're otherwise noted as being dollars, the units here are decatherms, which is the same as MMBTUs.
Okay. And how does that compare to a MCF?
If the heat content is 1,000 BTUs per cubic foot, then they are the same.
And so generally, are they fairly comparable, the figures?
Yes, within 5%.
Okay, perfect. All right, so give me just one moment here. Okay, so JJR3 presumes that you start February 12th with a completely full LNG tank, correct?
Yes, we assumed in this analysis that the tank was full on February 12th.
And we can see that right here in line 50, correct?
Correct.
Okay. 1 million decatherm.
Correct.
Okay. Now, That's also the same as 1 million MCF, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you would agree that February 12th is fairly late in the heating season, correct?
No, I don't think I would describe it as being fairly late.
Well, you would agree that if we were looking at a cold winter, right, where the winter starts in, say, mid-November, something like that, February is quite late in that season. You're looking at temperatures probably warming up in what, April?
I would expect so, yes.
Okay.
Depends on where you are, right?
Yes, it does.
In New Mexico, you would say that February 12th is fairly late in the heating season, right?
To be honest, I haven't calculated number of heating degree days before and after February 12th, so I don't want to accept that characterization, but I think we can continue the discussion anyway.
Okay. So would you agree that if it were a cold winter and demand were fairly high through the season, it is certainly possible that by mid-February, the LNG facility could be at, say, 60% capacity?
It's possible. It depends on the opportunity for refill and obviously on the need for the LNG prior to February 12th.
Sure. And you're actually, are you aware that Mr. Bullard testified on direct that the company's target is to come out of January with at least 625,000 to 650,000 MCF in the LNG facility?
With an emphasis on at least, yes.
Okay. And just for the record, that's contained at Gas Company Exhibit 1, page 65, lines 10 through 11. And Mr. Bullard, he is the gas company's vice president of engineering, gas management, and technical services, right?
I'll accept that, yes.
And so it's Mr. Bullard who will ultimately be responsible for the management and operation of any LNG facility at the gas company.
I think he'll have the ultimate responsibility for that, yes.
And so if Mr. Bullard says that his target is to come out of January with 625,000 to 650,000 MCF in the LNG tank, you'd accept that?
No, I don't think that's what he said. You left out the words "at least."
Okay, well, let's go with that. Okay, so he's going to say at least. That's their target, is to have at least that amount, right?
Correct. More is better, but at least that amount.
Great. So I want to imagine that we go into this Winter Storm Uri situation that you describe in JJR3 with the amount of gas in the tank that Mr. Bullard says they're going to at least target. Okay.
So up to the 650,000.
Yeah, let's assume the high end of that target, the 650,000. Let's say that that's what we go into the storm with. All right.
We'll accept that on a hypothetical basis. Yeah.
Great. And then you are also aware that Mr. Bullard says in his direct testimony that his target is to come out of February with at least 200,000 MCF in the tank, correct?
I'd have to go back and review that testimony, but we can accept that subject to check.
I can pull it up right now. This is Gas Company Exhibit 1 at page 65, lines 20 to 21. Right here at the bottom, the company's target is to come out of February with at least 200,000 MCF in the LNG facility. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, let me just read the rest of the paragraph. Hang on. I think you read that sentence beginning on line 20 correctly.
And I got the right meaning out of it as well, right? Because he talks earlier about, if there's without a big storm, we might come out with more, but like at the very least, we want to come out with 200, correct?
He doesn't say at the very least, but he does say the company's target is to come out of February with at least 200,000 MCF.
Okay, all right, thank you. We'll go back to JJR3. And so let's also imagine, so we're assuming that we're going into this scenario set forth in JJR3 with the 650,000, sort of target that Mr. Bullard set forth in his testimony. And I want to also assume that we're going to end this scenario and go to exit February with at least 200,000 MCF left in the tank, as Mr. Bullard says they target. Okay. Were you able to hear that?
Yes, I was.
Okay. You're okay with that assumption?
I think so. It's a hypothetical.
All right. And so what we've got then is we've got 450,000 MCF at most to use throughout the storm, correct?
No. You've entered the month with 650. You have liquefaction capabilities that you can operate from the 1st to the 12th. And then you have, of course, liquefaction capabilities after the 18th.
I'm saying in my hypothetical, let's assume that we're entering the storm with 650,000 in the tank, okay?
Okay. So not Mr. Bullard's assumption of entering the month, but entering the storm, okay?
Let's assume that we haven't had to use or that we haven't been able to liquefy any additional gas, okay?
I understand your hypothetical.
Okay. And so we've got 650 and we want to end the storm with 200,000 in the tank, okay? So we have 450 to play with throughout the storm.
Again, just to be clear, your assumption is not exit the month with 200, but exit the storm with 200, which is not Mr. Bullard's statement.
Okay, so there's a little bit of a difference there.
I understand your hypothetical.
All right, so if we've got 450,000 MCF to use throughout the storm from the LNG facility, that won't even cover what the gas company was able to pull out of Keystone during Uri, will it?
I don't know that I have that number here as to what it was able to pull out of Keystone.
So I've highlighted there line 5. You've got net Keystone withdrawals on line 5 with then a total at the end there.
Yep, thank you.
And so they were able to pull out of Keystone during Uri 548,965 MCF, correct?
I'm sorry, the number again, 500?
548,965 MCF. Is that correct?
I see the figure, yes.
And that's your figure, right?
That's the figure for the Keystone withdrawals from the 13th to the 18th of February in 2021.
Okay. And 450,000 MCF, if that's what we have to play with during the storm, that wouldn't cover the amount that they were able to get out of Keystone, would it?
Under your scenario, your hypothetical, you're right. 450,000 is less than 548,000.
And now, with Keystone in place, the gas company being able to pull out that 548,965 MCF of gas from Keystone, they had to go onto the spot market and buy 82,039 MCF of gas, correct?
Sorry, where is the 82,000 you're referring to?
So if you add up those 4 figures there, these are your spot market purchases, correct?
Correct.
lines 1 through 4 here. And if you add those up, would you accept, subject to check, that they total 82,039 MCF?
Generally, yes.
Okay.
Close.
And so the reason that they had to buy the 82,000 is because they only were able to pull out 548,965 MCF from Keystone, but they needed that additional 82,000, right?
Correct.
If they could only pull 400,000 MCF or 450,000 MCF, there's going to be, from the LNG, there's going to be an additional shortfall, isn't there?
If I understand your question, if you only withdraw or vaporize 450,000 of LNG, it doesn't cover the 548. So you have a little over 100. Well, you have a little less than 100,000 that you need to cover from elsewhere, which you would have done by, for example, not utilizing LNG on Wednesday the 17th.
And instead buying more on the spot market?
Right. If you had done that, the 13.8 becomes 13, a little over 13.
Well, so what do you mean the 13.8 becomes a little over 13?
If you chose not to use LNG for savings on Wednesday the 17th, you'll see that on that day, the volumes taken were 117,000. So if you had not liquefied on that day, you would have not incurred the savings that are there on line 24, which is the 826,000. So that's the effect. If you had to cut back your vaporization by 100,000, that's the effect.
So you'd also have to continue to make all of the same spot purchases, correct? That were made under Keystone, because you don't even have enough gas in the LNG tank to cover what Keystone was able to provide, right?
What you're suggesting is you don't have Keystone, and under your hypothetical, you're limiting me to utilize 450,000 of vaporization. As I understand that, is that the correct assumption?
Yes.
So what you would do to meet that condition, that limiting condition, is rather than utilize the storage for the entirety of the 631,000 that's on line 6, you would eliminate the vaporization on Wednesday the 17th, which means you would eliminate the savings on that day, which are $827,000.
If I could have just a moment, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
Sure. Again, this assumes that the maximum withdrawal rate per day is that 195,000, right? Decatherms are
Yeah, we never used more than 180,000
80. Okay,
in this scenario out of the 195 that we presume is available.
right. The maximum there is on line 11, Sunday the 14th. Is that right? 180,211.
That's correct.
So, Mr. Reed, so what you're saying is, and let me share my screen again here so we can see this. What you're saying is that you would, in my hypothetical, you would not vaporize this figure here on Wednesday, correct?
At least not all of it. I think we were looking to cut back, was it 95,000? I don't recall the exact math, but about 95,000 of vaporization.
98, I think.
Yeah, that would be the day I think I would choose to keep that in the tank.
Okay, and so you said that what that would do is that would erase the savings down here, correct? Down in line 24?
Now, the savings that we've calculated that the LNG tank could have provided on that day was 826,000. So by not doing that, presumably nearly all of that would have been lost.
Okay, but there's another wrinkle, isn't there?
Why don't you tell me what you're thinking of?
If you don't burn the 117,000, you got to go buy it on the spot market, don't you?
You presumably have to get it from somewhere.
And on that day, the gas company bought 10,751 off of the spot market, correct?
Correct?
At a cost of $1,075,100. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so to get an additional 106,000 off of the spot market, it would take you about 10 million bucks, wouldn't it?
That depends on what you'd have to pay, but if you paid the same amount for that 106, yes, it would increase your purchase gas cost by $10 million.
Okay, and that would eviscerate an enormous chunk of the savings that you've laid out here as possible in JJR3.
I'd have to redispatch the whole system to figure that out, but it could. Yes, if you had to go into the spot market and you did not have the ability to go beyond the 450, I think was in your assumption, of LNG vaporization, then it would increase costs.
And what that also means is that if in my hypothetical where you can only use 450, there is no way, since you can't even cover what the gas company was able to get out of Keystone, there's no way that you would actually be able to use the LNG proactively or resell day ahead purchases as you lay out in JJR3 in lines 27 to 45, correct? These two sections down here.
Yes, as I understand your question, again, if you're limiting the total LNG utilization for that period to 450,000, then this additional potential savings from line 27 down to line 45 would not be achievable.
Okay. And you can't use everything in the real world. You can't use everything that's in the tank for a February storm, can you?
Well, I think under your scenario, we're keeping 200,000 in the tank. And
that's prudent, isn't it?
Generally, yes. If you have an event like this, would it also be prudent to go beyond or below the 200,000 target level for end of February? Yes. That's why, again, you have targets and the right to go beyond it. But I agree, you would not want to drain the tank to zero. And as you know, that's what I said in my testimony, is I don't think that you'd want to go that low.
Now, you chose to cut on Wednesday, correct? To cut the liquid, cut vaporization on Wednesday, correct?
I think you're highlighting Tuesday, but yes.
Isn't this Wednesday here?
I'm sorry, that is Wednesday.
Okay, you're confusing me.
I'm trying to see where your cursor is.
Sorry. Yeah, it's a.
Yes,
All right.
Okay.
106,000.
So you chose to cut on Wednesday. Now, wouldn't you agree that the gas companies' practices and targets would make it much more likely that they would actually choose to cut on Sunday, wouldn't they?
No, I don't think so.
No? You think they'd cut on Wednesday?
Based upon the information that we have here, yes.
Well, when I interpreted Sunday as being the most catastrophic day, if you will. Is that not why you did that?
The price impact was the greatest on Sunday, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Well said. Go
What do you
ahead.
mean price impact was greatest on Sunday?
The intraday purchases, if you look at lines 13 through 18, the intraday purchases there were over $200 at times.
Right. Right. So you wouldn't
That-
want to buy gas, would you?
I'm sorry, this is part of that. You wouldn't want to what?
So you wouldn't want to buy that gas because it's so dang expensive.
You would do what you could to use your resources like LNG to avoid that.
Isn't
And
that
that's
when
why-
isn't that when the curtailment started? Right away? There on the 14,
The curtailment
historically?
of Keystone, is that your question? Oh,
What, of the Uri event and its impact on customers in Texas, and there
yeah,
were curtailments, weren't there?
there weren't curtailments in New Mexico.
No, there
curtailment
weren't.
Use customers. There certainly were in Texas.
I'm just looking at this as broader than just New Mexico. It was a regional event.
It certainly was, all the way to the Canadian border.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Now,
Oh.
Mr. Reed, you know this chart very, very well, don't you? Because you made it.
Yes,
And so you chose the day on which the gas was the cheapest to choose not to take LNG and instead to go on the market and purchase it, in my hypothetical, right?
I wouldn't say the cheapest. I mean, the price on Wednesday was $100 in the intraday market. There were days that didn't have intraday purchases. So,
Okay. So we don't know what those cost, but on this JJ R3, 100 is the lowest intraday price. Is that right?
so let's go down to line 32. Line 32 shows, for example, one of the price indices, which is for Transwestern San Juan. Actually, on that day, the San Juan price on Wednesday was the highest.
Is that the gas that you'd have to cover with then?
It depends on the availability of your transport to get to San Juan or to Permian.
Okay, so if you had to draw from the San Juan to cover this 106,000 here, right? If you didn't have enough capacity elsewhere, you might have to go down and take this $223 price, right?
Well, presumably, if we don't have Keystone, we still have Keystone's transportation. And that, as we know, is 190,000. So you have that from the Permian. And to the extent Keystone's not available, you still got the transport.
Okay, and so you're saying you could get it from the Permian. You're going to be able to get the $100 from the Permian.
Yes, I can't even vouch with any certainty that the intraday purchase was Permian. You have to understand that at that time, the range of fixed prices being established in the market were just literally all over the map.
Sure, people were just scrambling to get whatever they could, right?
Well, but we saw some transactions at $50 and $60, and we saw a couple at $500 and $600.
Right.
So,
And so I'm sorry, you can finish it.
difficult to say what any individual purchase would have cost.
Sure. And so having to go on the market and get the 106,000 to cover here, if you're not burning the LNG, we don't know what it would cost. Could have been enormous cost, right?
Could have been $50, could have been $100, could have been more.
Could have been 500.
I tend to doubt that, but anything's possible.
Now, you would agree that Mr. Bullard has testified that his intent is that they not run all three vaporizers at the LNG facility, correct?
As a standard operating procedure, that's my understanding.
And that's because that's the redundancy that they have built into the system, correct?
I think what he has said is he prefers to keep one train of vaporization in reserve. But obviously, when you have an event like this, you tend to modify the operating procedures to accommodate an extraordinary event.
Okay. Now, you would agree that at the time that all of this was transpiring, the gas company didn't know what was going to happen when they're looking at the situation on Saturday and Sunday. They don't know what's going to happen on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, do they?
Remember, this is a holiday weekend, so you're actually setting up your portfolio very early Friday morning. And then you're setting it up for Tuesday very early on Monday. So what you have is information about prices that are being quoted in the market, both real time and the index prices. So you don't know what's going to happen with regard to weather, and you don't know what the index is going to settle out on the next trading day, but you have the information as to what's happened.
So your testimony is that on Friday, the gas company knew what spot prices were going to be for Wednesday?
Objection, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
Please state the basis for the objection, Mr. Haverly.
Misstates the testimony, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
I'm not misstating, Mr. Hearing Examiner. I'm trying to clarify exactly what the testimony is in fact.
Let's
Witness
see what Miss, pardon me?
I was going off of that he never said that you could predict it on Wednesday, but let the witness talk. I'm fine with that.
Okay, go ahead, Miss. And obviously I got the sand dial up, meaning we are in, probably put a soccer ball up there, but, or anyway, we're in added time. Mr. Dodd, but go ahead. Just when this colloquy finishes, we need to decide what you want to do.
Absolutely.
I think I remember the question. No, I certainly did not say that on Friday morning before nomination deadline, you would know what the spot prices were going to be on the following Wednesday.
And on Saturday, the gas company wouldn't know what the spot prices are going to be on Wednesday, would they?
Correct?
Same for Sunday, correct?
Correct?
Same for Monday,
Correct?
same for Tuesday.
At some point on Tuesday, you know, but not before the trading, I'm sorry, not before the nomination deadline.
And so, Mr. Reed, ultimately, you can't predict spot prices, correct?
Not with any accuracy, that's correct.
If you could basically mint money, right?
You could certainly make a lot of money.
Sure. A lot of people try to predict it, I guess. So JJR3 described a scenario, right? We're outside of my hypothetical now. JJR3 describes a hypothetical where you ran the LNG tank basically bone dry. Correct?
There are 44,000 MMBTUs left if you went all the way through all three categories of strategic activity.
That's right. So
I'm sorry, all three categories of,
Strategic activity.
thank you, sir.
and you started, as we talked about earlier, with a completely full tank.
That's correct.
And you ran it all the way down to just under 44,000 MCFs, right?
Correct.
Now, in real life, you wouldn't do that, correct?
I think you probably would not. And again, that's said in my testimony that this was meant to show the potential of the tank in an event like this. And number one, I'm not hoping for a repeat of an event like this. And number two, I'm not advocating that you take the LNG inventory down to 44,000. But as a measure of the potential, that's there.
But aren't we trying to consider real life potential here? Isn't that what's important, is what the LNG facility might actually be able to provide to consumers and to the company?
It is, Mr. Dodd, and let's go to that point. The analysis that we presented in the table of savings assumed 0 for gas cost savings, okay? The 0.6% rate impact assumed that the beneficial impact on gas cost was 0. 0 in a Winter Storm Uri event, 0 on an annual average operating basis. What we've said is beyond that, there are certainly very potential savings that can be achieved through price mitigation and through operational enhancements. And as you know, in the rebuttal testimony, we say you can probably achieve between $3 and $5 million per year just in operational improvements. And beyond that, you can achieve whatever portion of Exhibit JJR3 you want to assume can be achievable in a Winter Storm Uri type of event. But the analysis we presented as the cost-benefit analysis for the LNG facility, to be clear, assumed 0 gas cost benefit. And then we went beyond that and said, we should also look at what's actually possible.
So you agree that what's demonstrated here in JJR3 is not real world, correct?
In general, I would say that Winter Storm Uri, number one, isn't real world, and hopefully these prices aren't going to be repeated. But that's why we assumed 0 and then examined the impact even under very typical conditions where we talked about the $3 to $5 million of annual savings. But to repeat, we built 0 into the cost benefit analysis.
But talking about this chart, right? What you laid out in JJR3, right? Winter Storm Uri, you would agree, Winter Storm Uri happened. That's real world, right?
It did happen.
And we're living in a world of greater and greater price volatility, aren't we?
It would appear to be so. Volatility generally is increasing, not to the level of anything approaching Winter Storm Uri, but yes, volatility is increasing.
Okay. And you agree, in real world conditions, it's unlikely that you're going to start in the middle of February with a completely full tank, correct?
I think that's correct, yes.
And there's almost 0 chance that you're going to run this tank almost bone dry in responding to a storm like this, correct?
In February, yes, I would not see that as being likely.
Okay, because it would be imprudent.
Most likely. I mean, it depends on your confidence in refill capability for the facility, but based upon normal refill conditions of 10,000 and based upon normal balance of season heating degree days, I would not want to take the LNG tank down to 44,000.
Because if you did run the LNG facility like you do here in JJR3, what are you going to do if on February 20th, another major winter storm hits that results in supply disruptions, right?
What you're going to do, of course, is buy intraday gas or buy swing gas. But
Sure.
to be clear, this is not what I would consider to be a projection of what you should expect for price mitigation savings associated with this type of event. This is a presentation of what's potential. And then we scaled that back to 0 in the cost benefit and 3 to 5 million as a more typical operating condition savings.
But Mr. Reed, aren't you aware that this right here, Winter Storm Uri, is the whole reason that the commission asked the gas company to look into price volatility?
I want to challenge that statement, and I did see that statement in one of the intervener witnesses. I said in my testimony that I think the primary benefit of the LNG facility is the enhancement to reliability as compared to Keystone. I'm not going to speak to the commission's intent in asking the company to undertake a study, but I can speak to what I consider to be the primary and secondary justification for the facility. Primary justification is reliability. Secondary justification is price spike mitigation. It's really important for both, but the reliability issue isn't every year, every winter month kind of issue. This kind of a price spike isn't an every month, every winter kind of issue. So again, my testimony was clear. I consider the primary justification for the facility to be reliability, secondary for price mitigation.
And so what you're saying is you don't care what the commission asked to be done.
Oh,
Objection, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
Sustained, strike that. That's stricken.
All right, so what happens when, if you run the tank dry like this and you've got another major winter storm on February 20th? You said earlier you'd go on the market and buy. What happens if there are supply disruptions to the point where you can't get enough on the market?
if there are supply disruptions, meaning, and you can't transport gas, let's say from Permian to the city gate, then you're going to have that same level of disruption with regard to getting Keystone gas to your city gate. It's a transportation disruption, there's not an issue of the gas isn't physically available. It's a question of how much you pay for it. So the capacity is there. If the capacity is functioning, it's functioning for intraday purchases or day ahead purchases or for withdrawals from Keystone.
Because what you're saying really is that the pipeline system, the supply system is robust. Is that right?
Yeah, typically it is. I mean, the infrastructure for delivery can be challenged, and that's whether it's compression for injection, compression for withdrawal, or compression for transmission. But those constraints apply to all elements of the infrastructure and of the supply chain. But again, to be clear, Mr. Dodd, number one, I wouldn't recommend, as I've said, taking the tank down to 44,000. And number two, if you have a second winter storm event in late March, second half of March, I think your example, and you've exhausted your LNG capability, then the answer is you have to secure that on the market. But again, I wouldn't do that.
And you would agree that we are in the middle of both the Permian and the San Juan basins, correct?
You have access to both, yes.
Pretty good direct access.
Yeah, pretty good, yes.
The chances of not having access to both of those markets at the same time is quite unlikely, correct?
Yes.
And so you would agree that, in fact, New Mexico is actually fairly well placed not to have significant issues in terms of reliability from a supply perspective, correct?
I think that's a little extreme. Again, you've seen force majeure events on the pipelines. You've seen force majeure events on Keystone. The analysis that we presented is a comparison of Keystone to the LNG in terms of reliability. I would not want to relinquish Keystone without having an alternative. And at the same time, it's been proven to be problematic to rely on Keystone. But if you're suggesting that supply reliability or infrastructure reliability is sufficient that you don't need either, certainly I would not accept that.
Now, and I don't think I'm saying that we don't need either. I think that, you know, the idea of having storage is really important for a gas company, right? You got to have some storage.
We agree on that. For a market that has this degree of swing and heating load, storage is very important. And more importantly, reliable storage is very important.
Okay. Now, Mr. Reed, I wanted to ask you, to date, how much have you and your company been paid for your services in this matter?
I don't know the answer to that. We were retained, as I recall, in August of 2022. And our analysis has been ongoing since that time, but I don't know the total amount of the payments.
How much are you getting paid per hour for your testimony here today?
I get paid, of course, for my time, not for my testimony, but my current billing rate is roughly $1,000 an hour.
Okay. And how many hours have you expended on this case, would you say?
Me personally,
Sure.
I don't know, more than 100
Okay. So just for your time, we're looking at over $100,000.
since August, yes.
Okay.
August of 22.
Would you say your company is probably billed somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million in this case?
Yeah, I don't want to hazard a guess. $500,000 may be a reasonable estimate, but again, that's just guessing.
Mr. Reed, let's assume for a second that the commission accepts the LNG proposal and moves forward, and we end up in a world where the gas company has abandoned Keystone and is reliant on the LNG facility. Can we accept this hypothetical for a moment?
I understand the hypothetical, yes.
And we're past that 1 year phase, so Keystone's no longer an option. Okay.
Okay, I can assume that.
The LNG facility that has been proposed and that would be built is a single tank, correct?
Correct.
If something were to happen to that tank or the facility as a whole, and it were down for one winter season, that would have catastrophic outcomes on customers and on the gas company in terms of prices that they would have to pay throughout that entire season, correct?
Yeah, I don't want to predict the future in terms of your hypothetical calling for a catastrophic outcome. Certainly relying on the LNG facility and then having the facility, I think you said, completely fail for an entire year is a almost inconceivable event. As to what would happen to mitigate the impact of that in terms of purchases or reorienting of gas supplies, I can't tell you, but it does seem like a even beyond highly improbable event.
Outside of the probability of the event, if it were to happen, the outcome would be catastrophic, correct?
By catastrophic, do you mean loss of life? Or are you talking about economics? Because I wouldn't want to presume there's loss of life here.
Let's assume that supply can be met, supply can be found, right? Demand can be met. We're not talking about a reliability problem. We're talking about a coverage problem and getting the gas and paying for the gas. Catastrophic from a financial perspective, correct?
Potentially, not necessarily. One thing that I think it's important to understand is, even though in our analysis we have assumed that the company relinquishes Keystone, so that 190,000 of withdrawal capability isn't contractually committed to the company anymore, but we have presumed that the company retains all of the firm transportation on El Paso and Transwestern that's currently used to deliver Keystone supplies to Albuquerque and to New Mexico. So that conduit that's currently at 190,000 a day for Keystone, we have presumed is still there. So you have a great opportunity to then go into the Permian market and buy replacement supplies and get it transported under firm transportation to New Mexico. So there is a continuity of that pathway that's extremely important from a reliability perspective and an economics perspective, especially given that Permian is the lowest cost basin accessible to the company. So important to understand, you're relinquishing the storage and the withdrawal capability, but you're preserving that pathway for the full 190 a day on an FT basis, a fully committed basis. So the question is, can you then go out and buy gas in Permian to replace the LNG output? Given that you're talking about a BCF of gas in its entirety over the heating season or over the entirety of the year, that seems to me like a plausible situation to go out and buy the gas. Could it result in a higher cost? Sure. Short answer is, by preserving that pathway, I think you've got a level of redundancy built in here that's a very important consideration.
So what your answer is basically that pathway is not reliable enough right now. We got to build LNG, but it's reliable enough if LNG fails.
Now, that's certainly not a fair characterization of what I said. The concern, to be clear, with reliability is with Keystone. There have been force majeure events on Transwestern, on El Paso, but the reliability concern that we're addressing through LNG is almost entirely Keystone, okay? It is the Keystone force majeure, it's the cuts on critical days. So preserving that pathway of FT, I think, does provide a very, very high level of redundancy and reliability. Could that be curtailed? Sure. Remember, when you have a force majeure event on the pipeline, you have pro rata curtailment of FT contracts. So again, if there's a 5% curtailment, you're still going to get the other 95%. But again, I think it's important to understand you do have that pathway, you have a redundant path back to the market. And as you said, you're relatively proximate to the market. So that can be a very good thing if there were to be that highly, highly improbable event of a complete failure of the LNG facility.
But if we had a complete failure of the LNG facility prior to a winter heating season, that would mean that we're going into a winter heating season with zero storage, correct?
Zero inventory of storage, yes.
Up next is New Energy Economy. Mr. Dodd, you have 20 minutes. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Hearing Examiner. And
Good
you
morning,
reviewed the
Mr.
responses
Wilcox.
to these
Good morning.
interrogatories and requests for production. First,
Yes.
I wanted to just ask you if you could please pull up what's been marked as New
Yes, I
Energy
did.
Economy Exhibit 9. And to the best of your knowledge and belief, the responses and materials contained within New Energy Economy Exhibit 9 are true and correct, right?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So, Mr. Wilcox, first, I'd like to review a few of what I see as the key statements in your testimony, okay? On page 9, lines 4 through 6, you testified, quote, NMGC has provided information that the LNG facility is the best option to mitigate the effects of a major winter storm event like Storm Uri, close quote. Is that correct?
And I'm just looking for that. What paragraph is that?
It's lines 4 through 6 on page 9.
Oh, I'm sorry. The version. Okay.
The PDF
that-
page 11.
Yes, PDF page 11, but numbered page 9.
Okay.
It's that first paragraph of the answer there on that page.
I have a redacted version that I'm looking at right now. Should I go to the original version?
I'm looking at the version that Mr. Black went through and admitted this morning, which is includes your
Oh, okay. I was looking at NEE's exhibit.
Oh, no, sorry. We're looking at staff's exhibit 1.
Okay.
Sorry about that. So page 9, lines 4 through 6, you testified, quote, NMGC has provided information that the LNG facility is the best option to mitigate
Yes.
the effects of a major winter storm event like Storm Uri, correct?
Yes.
And then page 10, lines 4 through 8, you testified, quote, NMGC provided analysis on the savings that could have been achieved if the LNG facility was operational during Storm Uri. This is a difficult analysis that involves estimating the avoided cost of gas not purchased over a 5-day period. NMGC estimated that having the LNG facility could have saved 33 million of the 107 million in purchased gas costs during Storm Uri. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
And then finally, on page 21, lines 4 through 6, you testified, quote, the LNG project will mitigate the gas purchase costs during severe weather events like Storm Uri, while the amount is difficult to quantify. NMGC estimated savings of 33 million during Storm Uri. Did I read that correctly?
That's right.
All right. Mr. Rilkoff, I've spent a lot of time poring over your testimony and really thinking about your position in this case. And I think that you take the gas company at their word that the proposed LNG facility would have saved millions of dollars if it had been in operation during Winter Storm Uri, correct?
I wouldn't say at their word, but what I was looking at, and I think Mr. Reed provided the testimony on the savings, and then Mr. Gould provided some analysis of that. And I look at things in terms of the way staff looked at this. We have a 1 BCF storage tank, and the big variables that you have to look at if you're going to estimate any savings, the major ones, there's others, but the major ones are going to be the price of gas that you're going to have to avoid paying for, and the amount of gas that you're going to avoid paying for.
Sure.
So when I looked at that and staff looked at that, you have a BCF tank, which is equal to 1 million MCF. And one of the numbers that came up in this hearing is, there were lots of prices, but if one of the prices that I've seen that could be an average for Storm Uri is $250 an MCF. So what that means is that you have $250 an MCF times a million MCF tank gives you inventory value during Storm Uri of $250 million. And
Okay.
If you replace 13% of that gas, if it wasn't available from Keystone Energy, that's equivalent to $33 million, which is the testimony of Mr. Reed.
Okay.
And if you included a smaller number, let's say you replaced 5% of that $250 million inventory in the tank, you come up with 13 million, which is Mr. Gould's testimony. So that provides a range between Mr. Gould and Mr. Reed. But what we really don't know beforehand is, what is that price going to be, and how much gas are you going to need to replace?
Sure.
And
sure.
So I think just by the numbers Mr. Reed and Mr. Gould provided, I think it's reasonable to conclude that this will certainly have price mitigating effects. You can create a matrix and you can pick the prices and you can pick the amounts, but certainly there is going to be price mitigation effects from the LNG facility.
And those promised savings are attractive. And that's one of the main reasons for your support of the facility, right?
Well, the savings are a key part, but also reliability is key, and
Sure.
possibly foremost, but yes.
Okay. So let me ask you. So, Mr. Rilkoff, were you listening in when I cross-examined gas company witness John Reed on Tuesday?
Yes, I was there.
Okay. And did you follow the discussion that he and I had regarding the figures contained in Exhibit JJR3?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And if you could please actually pull up JJR3 so that you can reference it as needed. I want to talk about the scenario that Exhibit JJR3 sets forth, okay?
Okay.
So as you stated on cross with the Attorney General's office, JJR3 presumes that the LNG tank is completely full when Storm Uri begins, correct?
Yes,
And it also presumes that they would have been able to draw from the LNG tank all of the gas that they had obtained from Keystone during that time frame, which was 548,965 MCF, correct?
okay.
Do you agree with that?
I believe so. I'm just looking for the number though. Is it in the spreadsheet?
Yeah, it should be in line 5 at the total amount for line 5. You see that net Keystone withdrawals and
Mhm.
then to the right. You see that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And it further presumes that they would have been able to avoid buying the 82,039 MCF on the spot market that they had to buy when relying on Keystone,
Mhm.
correct?
Okay, yes, this analysis does, yeah.
And that's the amount that allows for that savings of the purported savings of the 13.8 million, correct?
Yes, I believe so. Yes.
That's line 24 under the column total.
Yes, I see that.
And then they sort of project that they could have further been able to proactively use the LNG gas to reduce their day ahead purchases, right?
Right.
And that's what we see in lines 27 through 35. That's that titled proactive use of LNG, correct?
Yes.
And they claim with that strategy, they could have purportedly saved another 18.6 million, right?
Yes, that's the two numbers, the 13.8 and 18.6 come to the 33 million, yes.
All right. And then they go even one step further and say that they could have used the LNG gas to allow them to resell excess day ahead gas and make further savings, right? And that
Mhm.
comes out to 10.7 million more that they
Mhm.
claim.
Yeah, I see
Okay.
that.
And so in deploying all of these strategies, the gas company would have had to burn up nearly 960,000 MCF of the 1 BCF in the tank, correct?
Yeah, okay.
You see that in line 50 there, that they'd have a total inventory of just over 40,000 MCF left at the end of the 6 days.
Yes, I see that.
Now, didn't you hear Mr. Reed's testimony that the scenario set forth in JJR3 was not something that would happen in reality?
40,000, let's be more precise. It's almost 44,000, right? 43,996.
That's correct. 43,996 in line 50. Is that right, Mr. Relkoff?
Yes, I see it. Yes.
Okay. And so, Mr. Relkoff, didn't you hear the portion of Mr. Reed's testimony that the scenario set forth in JJR3 was not something that would likely happen in reality?
That would be subject to check, but I remember a discussion in that vein.
Okay, that he acknowledged that it was very unlikely that they would go into February 12th with a completely full tank, correct?
Right.
And that they would not run the tank completely empty, correct?
Right.
That they wouldn't run it down to just 4% of its capacity in mid-February because they still got to get through all of March, right?
Right.
And you heard him actually say that it would be imprudent for the gas company to use nearly all of the LNG in the tank in mid-February, correct?
I would agree with that.
And so you also heard about the parts of Mr. Bullard's testimony where he said that they would target to enter February with at least 625 to 650 MCF in the tank, right?
Well, subject to check,
Okay.
but I think that sounds correct.
Okay, and actually just for the record, that is Mr. Bullard's testimony on direct gas company exhibit 1 at page 65, lines 10 through 11. And then you also heard about Mr. Bullard's testimony on direct that the gas company would target to go into March with at least 200,000 MCF in the tank. That way they would be able to make it through the remainder of the winter, correct?
Mhm.
All right. And so what we see then is if let's assume that they actually met those targets, right? And let's say that they went into this storm with 650 in the tank. And they decided they were not going to leave the storm with less than 200,000. Then they would have only had 450,000 MCF to navigate Storm Uri, correct?
Mhm.
And you would agree that that wouldn't even be enough gas to cover the amount of gas that they had been able to pull out of Keystone, right?
Well, I guess the problem I have is I think Mr. Reed was probably asked to produce an estimate of what the savings could have been if the LNG facility was in service during Storm Uri. And he provided this worksheet, which is very instructive, but I just can't, it is so difficult to try to line up all the days for an event that happened in the past and put all these constraints around it when, earlier I just said, if the price and pricing is a key variable here, I think the prices are much lower, but if it was a $250 per MCS replacement cost, you would only have to replace 50,000 to get that $13 million of savings. So, and that's not a lot of gas, 50,000 over that 5-day period. So
Sure, but
so this is instructive, but I just, in terms of the probability of this happening, and you can move the prices, you can move the amounts on the days and so forth, but
right. But let's not move the prices. Let's take your average gas cost estimate of about $250 per MCF, okay?
okay.
And let's just assume that the company hits their targets and goes in with 650 and exits with 200, meaning that they have 450 to play with, okay?
Okay.
That 450 would not have been enough gas to even cover what they were able to get out of Keystone during Storm Uri, correct? Because they got 548,965 MCF out of Keystone during that time frame, right?
Okay, let me just absorb this. Okay, so could you just repeat that statement for me?
Sure. So if they only have the 450,000 MCF to navigate Storm Uri, based on Mr. Bullard's targets, right?
Right.
That wouldn't be enough gas to cover what they were able to get out of Keystone during Winter Storm Uri, let alone go out and be able to withdraw from LNG instead of making intraday purchases, right?
Okay, in this scenario, yes, okay.
And so what that would mean is not only would the gas company have to go on the spot market to buy the 82,039 MCF that they had to buy when they used Keystone, right? You agree with that, right? So if they can't even meet the amount of withdrawals from Keystone, they've got to cover the spot gas that they bought with Keystone plus the delta between LNG and Keystone, right?
You're saying that 569 and 440, is that?
What I'm saying is actually that basically they used a total of 631,004 MCF of gas between spot market purchases and Keystone withdrawals during Uri, correct? Do you see that in line 6?
Okay.
And so if they're using LNG and they decide based on their targets, they're only going to use 450,000 MCF of gas to deal with Uri, they're going to have that delta between 450 and 631 that they've got to go on the spot market to cover, correct?
Well, that's the issue is in terms of their total supply portfolio and what you have to look at what they did in terms of their base load gas and swing gas. And so that has an impact on it.
But I'm talking just about what's contained in JJR3, right? Like, let's just assume that it's not as rosy, it's not as green as Mr. Reed paints. And let's assume instead the company's target numbers, instead of the absolute best case scenario of getting to use almost an entire BCF to deal with Uri, let's assume that they really only have 450 MCF to deal with Uri. That means that they've got to go out and buy basically 180,000 MCF off of the spot market to cover. And so, whereas before they would have bought with Keystone, they only bought the 85,000 approximately, or 82,000 MCF with Keystone. But now they'd have to cover basically 180,000 MCF with the LNG. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, just 1 second. Yeah, under this scenario, I can see what you're saying.
Right. And so with your average gas price of $2.50 an hour or $2.50 per MCF, that's a spot market purchase of $45 million.
Yeah, under this scenario, I can see
Right?
what you're saying.
Right. And so
In
with
this
your
scenario,
average
yes.
gas price of $2.50 an hour or $2.50 per MCF, that's a spot market purchase of $45 million. Right?
In this scenario, yes.